Welcome to the Prospective Doctor podcast, where we will provide essential information for pre-medical students and those already in medical school. Listen each week for tips on how to improve your application and gain an acceptance to medical school.
Hey everyone, Happy New Year. Thanks for joining me and thanks for being patient while we went on a little bit of a hiatus over the holidays. I hope everybody had a happy holiday season and now we're getting back into the groove of things. Pretty excited as the application for medical school, the 2019 cycle, will be coming up this June. So there's a lot of things to start thinking about, a lot of things to start getting ready for if you are applying. But today I wanted to talk a little bit about the people that are in the current application cycle that haven't received interviews. So we're talking about the 2018 to 2019 applicants, matriculation plan for fall of 2019, and for those applicants that have not received any interview invites. So we do get those questions a lot. It's January. I haven't received any interviews. What should I do? Should I be worried? And the answer is a little bit of yes and no. So let's start with the positive. No, you shouldn't be worried. And that's because every year we see lots of applicants that get interviews after January. So most medical schools will interview all the way up until May, the matriculation year. So there's a lot of people that don't get their initial interview invites until after January. Some people, and I've even seen this happen every single year, don't even get interview invites until April. One time I've even seen somebody get an interview invite in May and then get accepted in June. So there can be extenuating circumstances where applicants get late interview invites. So getting your first interview invites in January is not particularly uncommon or particularly worrisome. There is still time that you could get interview invites and even a possible acceptance. However, there is also the bad news that I was saying. Yes, you should be worried a little bit. And the reason I say that is because even if you may get an interview invite, you may not. And you need to start planning for that. If it was back in October and you hadn't gotten any interview invites, I'd say don't worry about it. There's a huge season left. You can still make changes to your application if you have to reapply. But come January, February, if you haven't had any interview invites, this is the time to start at least considering what you will be doing if you have to reapply. This is because you still have about 6 months before the application submission happens. There's still time for you to make significant changes to your application. So, although you should still be positive and hope for some interviews, let's talk about some things that you should be considering if you haven't had any interview invites in early January or February. So, the obvious things that you should start looking at are your GPA and your MCAT. Do you need to retake the MCAT? The GPA is a little bit harder for you to make up in 6 months, but certainly you could retake the MCAT between now and applying, and that could significantly increase your chances. The next thing is really evaluate your extracurricular activities. Were you lacking in physician shadowing perhaps, or community service? You have about 5-6 months right now where you could start an activity, make some significant strides to increasing your involvement in that certain activity, which would of course increase your competitiveness. The other area I see a good candidate that's not getting interviews that they should really reevaluate are their letters of recommendation. The letters of recommendation are most often blind, so you don't know what your letter writer wrote about you. And I can tell you as a former admissions committee member, if you have a bad letter of recommendation, that is pretty much an automatic out for your application. If someone sees a bad letter of recommendation when they're reviewing you, they will probably not move your application forward at all. So that's something you can think about. Although you're not going to be able to read those letters, start evaluating who wrote your letters of recommendation. Were you very confident that that person would write a strong letter of recommendation for you? Were you maybe not on the best of terms? Maybe it wasn't a very strong letter. Maybe it was very, very generic. So start thinking about those people and maybe even approach them too and say, hey, I haven't received any interview invites to medical school. I really appreciate you writing me the letter of recommendation. Was there anything in that letter of recommendation which may have alerted medical schools that would want to save my application or put me on a wait list or something like that? Obviously, you want to do this very non-accusatory, very nice, and approach them in a way where you just want to get constructive feedback. But you can start talking to some of those letter writers and see if there could possibly be anything in the letter that would have alerted admissions committees. The other thing you really want to think about is, what was your school list like? Did you only apply to top-tier medical schools? Did you apply to a lot of out-of-state public schools that accept a very, very small amount of out-of-state residents? The school list can really, really affect your chances of getting admitted. At this point in the application cycle, it's probably too late to add any schools onto your school list. Most medical schools have already had their application deadline. So if you reevaluated your school list and you thought, well, maybe I should add some lower or middle tier schools to it, it's too late to add those to this cycle. But you can start thinking about that for next cycle. And then there's some finer details too. If you have to reapply this next cycle, did you apply right on time? Did you have your transcripts submitted on time? Did you have your application in perfect condition? Were there typos? Were there errors, spelling errors, grammar errors, things like that? Those are all things you should really meticulously pick through your application to find and pick out to see if those could be possible reasons that you don't have interviews. So that's kind of the bad news. If you haven't had interviews at this point, you should start thinking about, what can I be doing between now and May/June to improve my application? The final thing you should be doing and thinking about, if you haven't had any interviews in January, early February, is what you can do to improve your chances. Unfortunately, there's not a ton you can do, but you can write a letter of interest to schools that you haven't heard from. We have a whole nother podcast, tons of articles on Prospective Doctor about letters of intent, letters of interest. But just to give you a brief summary here, I usually recommend sending a letter of interest to a school that you haven't heard from within 2 to 3 months of submitting your secondary application. So let's say submitted your secondary application in August and it's now January and you haven't heard from them about your status, probably a good time to send them a letter of interest. The letter of interest should be specific to the school. You want to update them on any activities that were included in your AMCAS or secondary applications, and you want to express why you want to go to that school. Yeah, you may have said a lot of this in your secondary application to that school, but you want to either expand on those aspects or talk about different aspects of the school that interest you. A lot of people ask me about in the area letters, meaning like, oh, they're going to be visiting their family in Pennsylvania. Should they write Drexel a letter saying that they're going to be in the area? I don't think those letters are terribly impactful. I haven't ever heard of it really making a big difference in somebody's application, but I don't think it's necessarily wrong to do. But I think if you are going to write those in the area letters, you want to convince that medical school why you want to interview there. Not just because you're going to be in Philadelphia, but because you really are passionate about Drexel's curriculum. You've heard good things about your school, the school, your best friend goes there, and she can't say enough great things. She's really loving her time there. So not only are you expressing to them your interest because you're in the area, but you're expressing your interest because of different aspects of the school or what they have to offer. So of course you would like to include that in the letter. So hopefully for those people that haven't had any interviews in January or February, hopefully this is a little bit of reassurance, but also a little bit of things to start thinking about in the future. Just to give you a tidbit of my own situation, I had submitted my application slightly late to medical school. It was in the middle of July, and so I was somewhat late in my application. My first interview, I believe, was January 20th, and I had 8 interviews total. So I had all my interviews in the spring, and they continued throughout I think the last one was offered in May. So from my experience and other applicants' experience, it's definitely possible that you can still get interviews, but it is important to start thinking about the next step. If you want any help having a critical eye on your application, someone to really comprehensively review that AMCAS and help you find what are the things that you may have erred on or what are the things that you can improve on, definitely contact us. We'd be happy to do a general advising session where we can do an application review and really give you all of those details on how to improve between May and June. And we can also help you write that letter of interest to schools so that you are framing it appropriately and saying the things that schools will want to hear in order to offer you an interview. Hopefully everybody gets interviews this cycle and gets acceptances. We definitely would love to hear that. But if you need any help going through your application or going through this part of your application cycle, please contact us. We'd be more than happy to help. Wish everybody a happy new year. We'll talk soon.
Our mission is to inspire, encourage, and inform students as you journey through a rigorous and intricate process of achieving your dreams in medicine. Visit us at prospectivedoctor.com for more essential resources in your medical school journey.